Great, so we're seeing some, and just to answer the question, please just write in a brief comment for what well-being means to particularly during the crisis, but you can certainly define that term as it relates to your work or what you're doing more generally. So I'm gonna start reading some aloud as they come in. So from Sarah, well-being for me means to feel good physically, emotionally, and psychologically. From Susan, staying energized and positive. From Richard, physical, mental, and emotional health. From Susan, no burnout. From Laura, we look at well-being at the societal, sector, individual, and organizational level. We believe it includes psychological safety, energized engagement, healing, and resilience. From Susan, it's giving hope to clients served. From Brittany, well-being equals feeling balanced and healthy. From Melanie, encompassing physical, mental, and emotional well-being and staying positive. From Matt, well-being is about a holistic sense of belonging with yourself, community, and place. I'm gonna pause there so we can keep going, but please, please, please keep adding these in so we can hear from everybody through this chat about what it means to you and to your organization. And so with that, I'm going to invite our amazing chaplain, fellow social change leader, Eric, to begin to share how we think about well-being at Echoing Green, and particularly what the chaplaincy support of our well-being work looks like. Eric.
Thanks, Kate. I always feel like a newscaster. It's like you're passing over to me to talk about the weather. So I'm gonna just speak honestly with folks, because I feel like these times call for honesty. The social entrepreneurship space is a fraught one that both celebrates the individual, I think sometimes at the expense of the collective, and the heroics at the expense of the sustainable. So I started my initiative piece first. I'm a 1996 Echoing Green Fellow, or what's referred to as an OG at Echoing Green. And we work across 140 countries helping young people develop social justice projects. So we built the world's first venture philanthropy fund focused exclusively on young people. So we're giving away $10 million to help young people at the very early stages of their social change journeys. And I've been working with young people, particularly at the intersections of violence, and having had some of my own experiences with violence coming up, it's both a personal and a political piece of work. And I lost one of my students to gun violence maybe about 15 years ago now. And I remember being at Dion's funeral, and I was sitting across from his sister who had raised him, and I realized that I had absolutely nothing to offer this woman who was burying her brother. That all my training, all of my developments around problem solving, and you all know what I'm talking about, right? That's what we do, right? We solve problems all day, right? It's a budget issue, it's an HR issue, like that's what we do. We're problem solving machines. We get celebrated for it and it feels good, and then life hands you something you can't fix. Right? You can't fix a sick parent. You can't fix a dead 17-year-old, and all you can do is bear witness to it. And I realized I had no skills to do that. So I went back to school at 33 to do a master's in divinity with a focus on Buddhism, but really pastoral care and counseling. I got trained as a level 1 trauma chaplain with a focus on death and dying, which made me a lot of fun at parties while I was at school. Yeah, stay away from that guy. And what I realized, because I was deeply involved and committed to the Echoing Green community, is that the social entrepreneurship space, particularly the early stage entrepreneurs, lack some of those very basic resources. So we talk about chaplaincy. Chaplaincy is just caring for people's interior lives. like however you describe that, spiritual, emotional, psychological. It's caring for what goes on inside. And there are chaplains everywhere. Hospitals have chaplains, universities have chaplains, the Queen of England has a chaplain, every NFL team has a chaplain. Why don't folks in these very complicated, fraught spaces of sitting on the edges of social change not get access to these very basic resources? And so to Cheryl's credit, Echoing Green's credit, when we came and said we want to create a chaplaincy model, a secular chaplaincy model, but one that is built in centuries of spiritual practices within a hyper-secular world, which Echoing Green is, in the social entrepreneurship spaces in general, we said, yeah, let's try it. Because what happens with social entrepreneurs, as with all of us, is we have to mediate, right? We mediate between who we feel we have to be publicly, right? Everything's awesome. Yeah, I know exactly what's going on. This is great. And how we often feel privately, right? I'm a fraud. I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not white enough. I'm not smart enough. Like whatever it is, those voices that tell us we're not enough, that break up our ability to be whole. And so what we do within the Echoing Green community is we offer fellows space to be whole. So we do three things. We're at every gathering. So when fellows come on board, we're there to help create spaces of connection. We're at retreats, gatherings, creating spaces for connection. The second is we reach out to every active fellow once a quarter. So they get an email from us saying, how are you doing, thinking of you? And you don't have to respond. Like there's zero accountability. You can press delete. We just want you to know that someone is thinking about you and loving you in this moment. And the third thing is we're on call 24/7. So I got a call this weekend from a fellow who is struggling with something in their marriage, which is in the process of crumbling, and they can't leave. Like they physically can't leave the house to process this. And so we've become a safe space for fellows to talk through some of these issues. So I cannot tell you what projects fellows are working on. I can't tell you how big their staffs are, what size their budget is, but I know who just lost a child. I know who just had a miscarriage. I know who is hiring their first staff person. I know who is firing their first staff person. I know who just got $1 million and is scared. I know someone who just lost all their funding and is terrified. It's creating those spaces for the fellowship and the fellow community to be whole. And the last thing I'll say about our work, because I think it's important to say, is a lot of the work that fellows experience, I think we all do, is performative, right? It's saying the right thing, it's being the right thing, and we work so hard to be awesome all the time that we forget to be human. And so a lot of our work is just creating spaces for that humanness, and to feel like they don't have to perform for one another. This isn't a race. Like we're not all trying to get to the same place at the same time. Everyone's on their own journey. And so to normalize those experiences that folks are going through, there's a ton of secret keeping in the social entrepreneur space. And that secret keeping, that everything is awesome stance, gets in the way of really important connections that we can be making, right? A lot of fellows right now, a lot of us don't know if our organizations are going to be around in 3 months, right? In this moment, they're trying to figure out new ways of working. And so how do we create spaces where we can be fully human in that way? We're in the middle of a pandemic, but if you talk to just about every marginalized community in the world, like they've been in the middle of a pandemic for centuries, right? I have to be careful not to swear, my kids are home. This crap isn't new, right? And there's lots of indigenous wisdom and leadership and connections if we create the space to listen for it. And so what we're finding right now with our fellows is they're in shock. They're trying to figure out what's happening right now. They don't know where to turn to. They don't know who to talk to. And so I think the most important thing that we can be doing right now to support social entrepreneurs is just calling folks and saying, how are you doing? So every day from 4 to 6, I take a walk and I'm calling fellows. I'm calling Echoing Green staff. I'm calling friends. I will call any of you. So you can private chat your number to me and I will call you and I will ask you how you're doing. I'll tell you what life is like with 4 teenagers and 900 square feet. I'll tell you my favorite dad jokes, my favorite challah bread recipe, like whatever you need, because that is it, right? We often think about social change as awards, as movements, but it's always about individuals, right? Rachel D, who's on this call from Echoing Green, is one of the most grounded, kind, compassionate human beings I've ever worked with. Cheryl, Kate, right? And I know that because they reach out and they connect. So that is the work right now. Our work is to just be present to what is going on and to be present with one another. Rachel D, I think I'm passing it to you.
Well, it's always so hard to follow after Eric. It's virtually impossible, but I will do my best. And just want to thank Eric and Chandra and our other chaplains, just commitment to our community and the work that they do so beautifully and masterfully for our fellows and even for staff as well. It has been super important, special, and we are also grateful for what you bring to the table. And to Eric's point, you know, the people in our community have already been in the trenches, right? They work daily with vulnerable, marginalized communities. That is why we selected them. We are supporting their work. And I think in Crises, those elements of what they've been working to accomplish and the people that they've been working to support are elevated, right? And they become contextualized. That's like makes us hyper vigilant, right, to some of the injustices that have already been happening in our communities and in our world. And so we sat down, and with that recognition, we wanted to understand what is the best way for us to show up for our community, to create spaces, as Eric said, for them to be human in this moment. We are truly in unprecedented times, and it could draw a lot of anxiety and uncertainty and just a not knowing, right? This indefinite whenever, right? These timelines that continue to get moved. And we were asking ourselves, what is we can do right now, real time, to support our community? And so we thought to ourselves, the best way that we could do that is really thinking about how do we encourage community well-being? What does that look like? And so oftentimes as a portfolio manager, my colleagues and I, we often meet with our fellows one-on-one to share information about resources and or hear what their needs are in the community. And we've been hosting community calls for folks to just jump on and talk about what they're doing with each other. But these calls have been really open, right? And allowing them to share some of their grievances, some of their fears, some of the things that have been challenging them in this moment and share just in community with her. Being a social entrepreneur is already so isolating. And so we wanted to create a space where there's no agenda, there's no task, you don't need to check off anything, you just show up. And that is the work, it's just showing up. And so those community calls have become very important to our work. In addition to that, we've been saying, well, what tangible things are we able to curate, share out with? Been doing some crowdsourcing and cross-sharing of research sources as we think about ways that our community, a lot of them are already doing this work, how are they doing it in this context, and what resources are they able to share with their fellow community, and what could we share with them to help them during this time? And then encouraging fellows to really reach out, not only to our team, but to chaplains who, as Eric said, are available 24/7. They provide support, well-being support, and self-care resources to help our leaders to really kind of take off that cape, that leaders sometimes wear, and allow themselves to be human and to experience the grief and process the trauma and all the things that are happening in a safe space where they're supported and have resources to take the next breath or take the next step. So I think in general, these are things that we're working towards. But then as a fellow support community, we try to think about what are our current structures that we already have as a community. And fellow support is the nucleus of the work that we do. I sit on a team with amazing people who day in and day out, our focus is really what can we do to support our fellows, and do that in a way that really helps them to amplify their work and support the communities that they're working with. And so, Erin, if you want to switch to the next slide for us, please. We sat and we thought about what should our priorities be right now in this moment. And so in doing so, we figured that there are two things that, one, we are very strong in. This is the work that we do, but this is the best way that we can show up. And so the first thing is rapid response. I'm going to go to the next slide first, Erin. Thanks so much. So rapid response support to our fellows in this moment. So what does that look like? Well, it's fellow support, and that means that our staffing model has shifted to support fellows right now in this time. Our focus is really understanding what can we do during COVID-19 to really support them in a way that helps to alleviate some of that stress, but then also gives them real tangible things that will help to support their work, or help them to think differently about how do you run remote teams if you are used to being a proximate leader and actually in the community, and now there are certain parameters around how we interact with humans and have that connection. What does that look like? So redirecting existing staff to emergency fellow support, right? So we know that, again, we work with leaders who are already on the front lines working in marginalized communities, but there are certain emergencies that are happening real time as a result of COVID-19 that we want to make sure that we're prioritizing in a way that will help our fellows to walk through that with people who care about them and galvanize resources to support them. And also increasing expert support offerings for fellows, right? We may not know everything, but we know someone who knows something that can support our fellows in the work that they're doing. So really elevating those things and identifying who those experts are. And I mean, we're so grateful to partner with Skoll as we offer this as a way to provide support as well, these virtual gatherings that we have been having. And then there's well-being support, right? So again, that's opening up our chaplaincy hours for our alums in crisis. You know, we have current fellows who have been with us either at the very beginning, they're halfway into their fellowship with us, or they're concluding. And then we have our alums, right? They're still a part of our community and super valuable to our community. And so opening up those chaplaincy hours for them, and then building out a chaplain-led group support opportunity. So realizing that we have 3 amazing people who are readily available for our community, but we have a community of over 1,000 social entrepreneurs and leaders all around the world, and trying to understand how do we kind of up some of these support groups and opportunities for them. If you want to go to the next slide for us, please. Thank you. So then we thought about, okay, yes, we're in crisis, right? And so our first priority is rapid response, but recognizing that we are entering into a new era, and what we know to be true now in this moment is that things have shifted, and how we approach things will look very different from this day forward. And so we wanted to think about future proofing Echoing Green in our world. And much of what we do is it is the center of what we do is around community. So we thought about 3 ways that we can engage community, and that's to convene our communities. So piloting 2 to 3 remote convenings to continue support for our community around timely issues. Engaging our community through a virtual volunteer opportunities, including employee engagement opportunities with some of our corporate partners, to provide the ability for those who want to support Echoing Green and our fellows during this time to do so effectively, even without the capability to meet in person, right? We have all, as Kate mentioned earlier on the call, probably have had our fair share of Zoom, but you know, how awesome is it that we do have a capacity to support that through technology. And so finding ways for us to really do that, and creating a space for folks to get together, even if it cannot be in person. And then supporting our community in general, you know, and that looks like expanding our well-being support for our fellows through an expanded chaplaincy offering. And this would include different types of offerings and the ability to scale up and back according to the demand and circumstances. So these are things that we're thinking about as we're future proofing for the work that we do. And so now, you know, we've shared a lot of information just about who we are, why we're so invested into well-being and well-being support for our fellows. And now we want to open up the floor to questions. And I think Eric is going to lead us in that. And then after that, we'll switch to talking about some call to action. You know, maybe you sat on this call and you had some thoughts running through your mind that piqued your curiosity, or said, you know what, we really need to back to our organization, or I think that idea that I want to come with to support our community. So we'll invite you then at that moment to kind of share what your call to action would be. But Eric, if you'd like to guide us through our question and answer moment, that would be great.
Sure, and this is where we bump up against the limitations of our video interface. So what I want to invite folks to do is just take a moment and digest what we walk through in terms of what Echoing Green's thinking about. Think about it in terms of your own work, your own life. One of the things I chide fellows about all the time is they talk about work-life balance as if somehow our work isn't part of our lives, as if somehow if our 4-year-old is sick, they stop being sick when we show up at work, or if we're stressed about a big meeting, we're somehow not magically unstressed when we walk through the door at home. It also assumes that there is this like magical balance moment, right? That if we just work hard enough and read the right book and drink the right tea and have the right mantra, we reach this place of balance, which of course is also because it's a constant rejiggering of priorities. But I am really interested in this concept of integration. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how folks are thinking about integrating some of their own practices. So take a moment and think, and then shoot your questions into the group chat, everyone, and I'll pull them out and read them. I won't be able to do your beautiful voices, but I'll at least capture the words. So what questions do you have? What do you want to know more about? What stuff do you want to share? Okay, our first question is from Aaron. Are there any resources available that we could offer partners if we don't have any sort of chaplain trained professionals on staff? That's a great question. It's a question that we get a lot. So yeah, we'd love to have 3 trained chaplains on staff, but not everyone's able to do that. So I think one of the problems that I'm experiencing right now is almost a glut of resources. Every organization is sending out links and their webinars. So definitely pay attention to that and pay attention to what's going out and curate them. There's some great folks that are doing some of that curation, and I'll invite my colleagues to just to say what some of those are, or folks who know them can also type them. But I think the most important thing that we can do right now is to check in with our people and ask them what they need. I think what often happens, particularly those of us who are in service to social entrepreneurs and organizations, there's just like, I got to do something, like I need to jump in. And I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist priest, who inverts the phrase, don't just stand there, do something, and says, don't just do something, stand there. And so I think setting up time to just ask people how they're doing, to pull together some of the resources that are flowing through are some of the best things that you can do. Kate, Rachel D., are there other places that you would direct people that you're seeing?
I think what you said is spot on. I think that asking, and even for staff that aren't necessarily trained in chaplaincy, just putting on that different mindset of how can I be here for you in this moment? That might look different from how you normally might be there for one of your community members in that moment, and just naming that, I think can really help create that space. We're in a place where, as Rachel D. said, all of our staff are showing up in different ways to our fellows. And so by just saying that out loud, it makes it really easy for people to start to see each other in a different way and in a different role.
One of the things I say to adults who work with young people is that the 4 most powerful words you can say to a young person, I think this is true to anyone, is how can I help? Because first of all, you're offering to help, which is a good thing. The second is think about where the power sits in that question, where the agency sits in that question, right? It's not like, here, let me help you, or let me tell you what I'm doing, or let me tell you what I think you should do. And more often than not, people say, I don't know. And I think the second most powerful question you can ask is, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Right? How people get in touch with what they're experiencing. Richard has a question for the group. What are the keys to convening safe virtual spaces for the community calls versus one-to-one, especially if fellows don't already know each other, they're not connected? Yeah, a lot of people meeting for the first time on Zoom calls. I can't wait for the eventual romantic comedy Love in the Time of COVID-19, where you've got, like, I don't know, I guess Meg Ryan's too old, but whomever, like they meet in a Zoom chat and fall in love through the Zoom group chat function. I think the ways that we connect people doesn't change virtually. I think it's leaning into people telling their stories. I think it's setting clear expectations about why a group is meeting and how we expect people to show up, and then it's modeling that. And then it's really important to have culture carriers who sort of form a foundation. This isn't the best language to use, but it's the one that I'm thinking of. But know how to behave, and sort of reinforce that culture. So I think as you're bringing groups together for the first time, and Kate did some lovely modeling of this. Like these are the rules. Like this is how we're going to play together. This is the invitation. So this is the purpose of the time. And then to start with stories. So if you got a big group, it could be something in a sentence or 6 words. Share something that's bringing you joy right now. If it's a smaller group, asking people what's on their playlist, what's in their Netflix queue or what have you, depending on the cultural context. It's always nice to lean into stories when you're bringing groups together and inviting people to connect on that. And then finally, to my introvert brothers and sisters out there who the thought of needing to share something in their first meeting is terrifying. Also creating spaces for people to write something or draw something or to observe in silence, I think is also powerful. Next question comes from Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Do you have social enterprises in your community focusing on organizing well-being programs? If yes, could you please share information about them? Cheryl, Kate, Rachel, are there fellows that are doing work in this area that we want to shout out into the space?
Cheryl, you can start, or Rachel D.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting because I think that it is not necessarily just a particular topic in one organization, where we do have fellows who are working to design more racially equitable community spaces for children and education. And a lot of that has to do with well-being. So I think there's a lot of intersection that we see, intersectionality that we see within our organizations, as they're really at the intersections of like justice and innovation, and well-being kind of plays this foundational role in a lot of what they're doing, trauma-informed things. There's an organization called HALA that supports healing justice in communities, and so they do work around well-being. And so we do have organizations that have more of a healing focus. I don't know if Priscilla's on the call, but Sacred Generations, which supports Indigenous communities around healing practices as well, and justice. So we have several, many actually organizations that do this type of work and embed well-being into a lot of their practice, if that makes sense. Kate, I didn't know if you wanted to add a few things as well.
No, I think that's right. And I'll just shout out a couple others. I've had a few colleagues sharing some names in the chat with me. So our fellows Girl Trek and Aliento. I agree with Rachel D that so many of our fellows are touching it in many different ways. I encourage you, our team, in the past few months or so, launched a really incredible new website and database where you can go to learn about all of our fellows. And there's a particular part on our site too, where you can see specifically what fellows are doing with a COVID-19 response. So I encourage you to look at that and find some incredible organizations there.
Yeah, and thank you. The only thing I would add, I think you're right, the work that Corey and his team do at HALA, how our lives link together. The healing justice framework is really powerful. Absolutely, the incredible work that Priscilla does at Sacred Generations, working with Indigenous leaders, incredibly powerful. Girl Trek is another good one. So many of the social entrepreneurs in whom we invest come out of a justice tradition and really sort of center what Rachel D talked about, sort of a healing justice framework that really centers this notion of intergenerational trauma and how we heal together. And I think all of those examples are spot on. And I would add SE Justice Group, the work that Gina Clayton Johnson runs. So we've got some good examples of how people really honor the collective, as Eric and Kate and Rachel D were mentioning, which is really quite powerful.
So I'm going to bring in one more question. That's actually a trio of questions. From Sasha, this question about how do you think investors should be supporting entrepreneurs' well-being generally and specifically during this time? And then Rick adding this piece about how do we keep our outreach to our clients and grantees not becoming info overload and demands for responses engagement that they being responsible superheroes take away from what's doing important. And then Laura added this piece as well. is something that she's thinking about is trying to minimize requests or time demands given grantees. What I hear in that question is for those of us with resources, how do we show up in the ways that are best? So to repeat myself, ask like, how should I be showing up to your grantees? So we both receive money and we give money away. And so what we're hearing from a lot of our funders is just removing restrictions to grants. Like, you got the money already. If this project doesn't happen, don't worry about it. So I think one of the most important things that we can do is ratchet down the performance anxiety. We believe in you. What do you need? How can we help? To understand what the frequency of information is needed. And by the way, these are all good practices to live in post this pandemic, right? To figure out, think about the game Jenga. And you got all those blocks in there. To ask the question, like, what blocks can we remove? What friction can we remove from our systems? What demands can we remove and still have that integrity? I imagine if you look at traditional grant proposals, you could probably remove 60 or 70% of those questions and still have integrity for what you're doing. What we have done is we put together $1 million rapid response fund to get, and we give out $250 micro grants to help young people get started. We typically, we small pilot. We put out a little bit in our network. We thought we'd get a dozen requests. We got 800 in a week. And these are young people from 72 countries who want to do things right now to make a difference and have brilliant ideas. So to think about how you can use your resources to not just support the folks that are in your network, but in your network's network. How do we get more resources out to people who aren't just in our tribe, but folks like Corey from Hala, who might not ever be on your radar because of where they work or how they work. So I think there are opportunities to not only be flexible, to let go of things, but also to think about how you can step up and how you can step beyond to meet the needs in this moment. And to bring in a final piece, the question that Laura is bringing about, like, what are the impacts of this? We're all learning new ways of working. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a leader at Facebook, and she travels all the time, and she isn't. She's like, dude, I've been to more virtual happy hours with colleagues in the past 2 weeks than I've been in the past 2 years, just connecting with people. And she's like, I could do that all the time, right? So I want to come back to the points I was bringing up earlier, and then pass it back to Kate and Rachel to close. Right now, I think our job is to be present and to pay attention. Like, what are we learning? What are we feeling? And how are we connecting? And then to ask how we can help, particularly for those who are most vulnerable, who are the folks who are not, who would not have been at Skoll necessarily. The folks who do their work from the margins, because there's a lot of wisdom that comes up from there that doesn't get seen. And the last thing I'll say, just to channel my Jewish grandmother, is figure out ways to feed people. So if you're doing a Zoom call, see if you can get like Uber Eats to send everyone their favorite meal while you're doing that. Wherever you can get food to people now, those small acts of joy and connection, I think are just as important now as they've always been. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eric, for helping us to feel through those questions and answers. We just actually kind of want to hear from you right now. We know that this is a conversation, and while we have offered some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of how we're showing up right now in this moment, we'd be curious to know, just from a couple of folks, feel free to drop it into the chat, but what do you feel your call to action is, like, or what's one thing that you can bring back to your own communities that you're thinking about maybe differently or for the first time from some of the conversation that we have had today? So we'll open up the space for a few moments here if anyone is willing to share something that they feel might be helpful to bring back to their own communities. And there's also no right or wrong way to do something, right? Even if we're just gonna hold space. I think those things are super important during times like this as well. Okay, we have someone here, Richard. I'm taking back to the team. How can we increase the well-being balance and the support we are offering our global portfolio of social entrepreneurs? Wow, that's really awesome. That's a great question. That's where the nexus of my work lies as a global portfolio manager, understanding that in particular. I think that's fantastic. Erin says, it's been so valuable to hear how important it is to give ourselves the space and just be. Sorry, this is moving really fast. Yeah, for each other, fighting the instinct to always feel productive or action oriented. I just want to take a brief moment to land on that. I think it is super, that point is so important. You know, you can read the news and through social media and everyone's like, oh, now that you have the time, like this is the perfect, do this or do that. But you know, moments like this, even as our bodies are like physically responding to trauma, and a lot of it we don't even realize that we're holding, it's important to push against that instinct, Erin, right? Like to feel like you gotta like do something immediately. Sometimes it is literally just holding space. I mean, we had a community call on Friday. I left the invitation open. I got on and I said, and I'm gonna just be, and whatever you want to say or not say, it's fine. We're just here together. So I think that is super important. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to read a couple more and then I'll pass it back to Kate. This says that Rick says that you're looking at relaxing restrictions and deadlines for our grants and focusing on more immediate responses rather than multi-month programmatic actions. I think that is amazing. Thank you so much, Rick. That's super helpful. Sarah, you're a social entrepreneur working with women with special needs, and you are planning to organize wellness programs for your team members and women with special needs, especially in this crisis. I think that is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And then last one, Abigail or Abby, with the giving practice, supporting Family Foundation in the US and LAC, thinking of promoting the idea of creating funding for existing grantee partners, but also micro grants for grantee communities. So I think you guys are, everyone is on target here, and so grateful for what you shared in this space. Thank you for allowing us to have the opportunity to talk with you through this and why it's so important, why we do this work, why we've been doing this work. And we hope that this session has been great for you. I'm going to kick it off to Kate to close us out, but thank you so much for everything that you brought to this moment with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rachel D. And I want to lift up one more thing that I saw in there that I think is important, and something that has made me feel really grateful is also making sure in all of this, and I think this has been said in a few different ways, but supporting yourselves and your staff too, creating space to take care of yourselves. I think when we're in this work of supporting others, we can pretty easily put ourselves on the back burners, but really looking internally too is important. And that's something that I know I'm grateful for, that Echoing Green has been very intentional about this, and that allows us to show up even better for our entire community. So with that, I want to thank everybody so much for joining and for the conversation. While we didn't get to hear voices, it really felt like we were truly connected with each and every one of you through the conversation. Again, to learn more, we are, one of the things that we're doing as an organization is creating a rapid response fund to support our fellows in this moment. So you can learn more about that at echoinggreen.org/COVID-19. And the link is here. We have another session that I want to make sure everybody knows in our series on Friday with Echoing Green and Cheryl, as well as Bridgespan and Skoll, on breaking down barriers to capital, overcoming racial bias in funding. That's Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So I encourage you to join us again there as we round out this week. And most importantly, sending all of our best wishes and support and love to each and every one of you in your communities. Thank you for joining us, and we'll close out. Cheryl, any final words from you?
No, just thank you. Deeply grateful for you all for leading us through that. It was incredibly powerful, and thanks to each and every one of you who joined. Thank you to Brittany for supporting this session and this track. And as Kate said, sending lots of love to everyone. We'll get through this together.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.